Good day and thank you for joining CivilNet. Today my guest is Emil Sanamyan. He's a freelance journalist. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Sanamyan.
My pleasure.
You've published pieces after the Karabakh escalation. This is an area, a subject that you are very much involved with, and you work in the United States internationally. Firstly, I wanted to ask you, what's the general perception outside of Armenia of what's happening in Nagorno Karabakh now? Media and society.
If we talk about a very broad look, of course, it's a very small blip on world map of events, and events keep on happening. So, of course, most people's attention span is very short. Even for the public in Yerevan, it's sometimes hard to keep attention on any particular topic. Pope or, arrives or somebody says something about the genocide, that all of a sudden becomes an issue again. More important.
Well, that's news.
Yeah. So in the United States, Karabakh is a very small matter for most people involved in policy discussion. Of course, outside of that, there is lack of foreign policy awareness. As far as Washington, for a long time, Karabakh conflict has been seen as this issue that can be resolved. Then for a bit there was a sense that, well, it's kind of unnecessary to resolve it. And now again, of course, because of renewed violence, there is a sense that something has to be done there. Of course, it's driven primarily by the fact that the US government has finally refocused its attention on the Karabakh conflict, at least through the involvement of Secretary of State. And on issues of this sort of tangential importance to the United States, that's what drives interest, right? If top officials of the US government start to discuss, or at least have conversations about it, about a certain problem, that what drives public interest. So now there is some discussion of Karabakh conflict, and as in most issues of this sort of tangential importance, people are looking for sort of quick solutions. And the way they look for quick solutions is they go back to a drawer and see what has been discussed and kind of try to go back to that. And I don't know how long this attention will persist. Most likely it's a matter of the end of the Obama presidency, because there is going to be, after November, a new president-elect. If it's Hillary Clinton, of course, she has some prehistory of role in diplomatic efforts in the Caucasus, so it will probably continue in some form or shape. If it's President Trump, President-elect Trump, then it's a completely different story, or could be completely different. Nobody really knows.
Yeah, nobody really knows. How about the media? Because this time around what we witnessed was that international media had longer pieces, more analytical pieces, more publications about Nagorno-Karabakh. And as what was different, in my opinion, from other times about Nagorno-Karabakh is that it was more unbiased, or there were more pro-Armenian pieces, if I may say so, than the lobby kind of was balanced out.
Yeah, what made a huge difference are two things. On one hand is unprecedented crackdown on media in Azerbaijan. That's been ongoing for a number of years and has not really reached an end. It continues. And of course that created a particular perception of Azerbaijan or any Azerbaijani government's action. And of course it reflected on the fact that no journalists were allowed to report from Azerbaijan. The ones that tried were actually detained and had to leave Azerbaijan, like some of the Russian journalists. The Georgian journalists also had issues there. So people could only report through government-organized tours after the fighting was over. And thankfully, Karabakh government, Karabakh authorities, they were much more open to media, to their presence, and organized also press briefings, organized trips to the front line. So there's two completely different approaches to the way the media was treated. Yeah, it has huge impact on how media treats you. So I think that's what was the angle. I can't say it was necessarily some kind of reflection of deeper shift in political mindsets or attitudes. But I mean, the biases in general tend to be against the war, and of course the initiator of war always gets bad press. There's no way about it, so that's also.
That's also part of it. Even though there was no direct talk of Azerbaijan being the aggressor at this case, everyone's like, but I think...
There was general assumption.
Yeah, it was a general assumption. In our conversation right before, you said you had put together a chronological events of what happened in Nagorno Karabakh in April. If you could give us an overview of, events that followed one another, even though media has been following and we have been following.
Yeah, that's been sort of how I try to kind of manage events that are substantial in their complexity, but also manageable in size, because the fighting had stopped. Large-scale fighting had stopped fairly quickly. It was a fairly manageable period of time and of events, but at the same time, there's been confusion as far as what happened when, and in conversations with people who were there or who visited there, there was a lot of inconsistencies that happened. My sense of why, say, fighting happened when it happened, I think is driven, of course, Azerbaijan being the initiator of this round of hostilities. Its leadership, its president, had particular calculations. So if we look at a general picture, of course, has been one of Azerbaijan earning a certain amount of money, substantial sums of money, converting that to military arsenal, converting that to training, and increasing pressure on the Armenian side in the conflict, on the line of contact specifically. And it's, the buildup is very evident as far as casualty rates that has been going especially since 2012. There has been some slowdown in 2013, then again,
since 2014,
spike in 14 and then 15. So this, something was building towards this, right? As far as general policy. Now, why specifically in April? I think there were two sort of very interrelated schedules there. One, both on Azerbaijani side, as far as their calculations. Number one was Azerbaijan priority has been to try to find funding for the gas pipeline for the past 3 months, and one of the key elements of that sort of search for money has been Aliyev's trip to Washington, which was worked out finally after long efforts. They've put in a lot of energy into making sure that they would be invited to the summit in Washington at the end of March, beginning of April. So if you look at the period of 3 months period, 4 months period since the invitation, Aliyev's invitation to Washington and the April fighting, there was a substantial hiatus in fighting. And say if from perspective of military operations, it probably went against Azerbaijani military thinking in this case, because say when the roads are closed between Armenia and Karabakh, what they did in April would have been more effective in say January or February when there's a lot of snow. They had to wait that out until the trip. And coming to actual hours of when the fighting began, they began almost as President Sargsyan went on board a plane to go. So unlike President Aliyev, who flies on his own plane to the United States, President Sargsyan takes commercial aircraft to Europe and then flies his own plane. So for that period of time, 5, 6, 7 hours, he was incommunicado. So from perspective of Azerbaijani leadership, where decision-making is very centralized.
So this kind of cancels out some of the ideas that it was just a routine situation, but having no resistance from the Armenian side, they basically came in further and escalated more than they had anticipated.
It always depends. What actually happens in the end always depends on counteractions of the other side, because it becomes a dynamic situation where you don't have a decision to sort of...
A lot of people were saying that it was not initially Azerbaijan's intent to to come so much into the Nagorno Karabakh contact line. It would just happen because
no, I think they had a larger plan, but it did not to capture Karabakh. Of course, there was a limited operation to try to improve their position on the line of contact, and they succeeded in certain aspects, but failed in others. But as far as the timing, I think it was very, very clear that it was not coincidental. It had to do with the Washington trip. It had to do with the conclusion of the Washington trip. And of course, I don't know if they thought about Sargsyan being out of the picture, because thankfully on the Armenian side, the decision-making is not as centralized. So you don't need Sargsyan's permission for military operations for Karabakh army. And they, after initial period, of course, of mobilization, which is necessary period, and of course, initial period when you mobilize under fire, which is always problematic, they managed to
counterattack and take back some of the positions.
That was my kind of sense of why it happened at that point, and then why it was stopped fairly quickly again, because the objectives were limited. The initial Azerbaijan agreement to ceasefire was basically 24-30 hours after the fighting began, so that was their initial sort of notion that they can do something very quickly and hold it. And
but the first ceasefire announcement from Azerbaijan side was completely a spoof, let's say, because that didn't even hold for a couple of hours.
Well, they said that they're ready to, and of course the Armenian side that they were not ready, and of course the fighting continued. And the fighting continued because the Armenian side tried to retake the positions that they lost. So they managed to retake some, but not.
Well, this is the first time we in Yerevan speculated that we have more land or positions to retake. When Armenia didn't agree to the ceasefire, the general assumption here was that means we still have work to do, we still have to retake some positions. Well, information was very scarce at that point here as well. We were not quite sure how much land was, lost, or what positions were exactly lost, or if they were, because officially everyone was saying something completely different.
And, when it's a dynamic situation like that, it's very hard to actually have that kind of accurate reporting by the government. And of course, the track record of this government has been one of trying to avoid, like any government, they try to avoid any semblance of failure or incompetence, which always happens in this sort of events. And that's what they, to a maximum, try to kind of pretend that nothing serious is going on, and then they couldn't, of course, do it in the way that Azerbaijan say could do it, where there is a media blackout. Here, there is some media activity.
If I'm not wrong, you're going on a fact-checking mission to Nagorno Karabakh.
No, I wouldn't say it's fact-checking. I mean, I'm going there on private capacity, just. I go there, try to go there regularly. Of course, after this events, I haven't been, and want to see what the life is like. I mean,
what the situation like, and probably through conversations with individuals who might not want to be named or quoted.
Well, yeah,
this is just the general outcome of your trip to Nagorno Karabakh. What do you expect it to be?
Well, I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I'd rather not speculate yet. Just on the way back, maybe we'll talk.
Because, for example, when we were in Nagorno Karabakh and you go to Talish and you realize, you come to certain conclusions that this place is not going to be repopulated. And then a lot of people tell you that. But yet there's no official announcement of such things. And with information such as this, sometimes you don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah. No, I mean, basically, people live in bubbles, right? We have a bubble in Washington, America. People have a bubble in Yerevan. There's a bubble in Stepanakert too, even though it's a small town, it's still a town. So people live there, and sort of things happening in Talish. Most people from Stepanakert never been to Talish. So, but if we look back at Talish was repopulated fairly recently compared to most other villages in Karabakh. Why? Because so close to the front line. And I remember some reporting from Talish last September, for example, Talish and Madagis, when there was initial artillery fire. there for the first time, and it was clear that those places are very exposed to any kind of artillery fire. And if we look at, in general, sorry, let me go back to that so that I don't have that. If we think about Talish and Madagis and that general area, it was very, very exposed from the beginning when it was just repopulated, very close to the front line. And if we think about why decision was made to repopulate those places, of course, it's a politically driven decision to sort of say that, you know, this is our territory. But
we feel safe enough.
Yes, yes. And as the situation was beginning to unravel security-wise, it was clear that those were the most exposed areas. And if we look at why, say, Azerbaijani decision-making was where to launch, you know, this particular operation, if we look at where it was launched at the two of the most distant areas from Stepanakert. If we look at where Stepanakert is, the furthest points, Talish and Arax River, right? So from the perspective of command and control, from perspective of commitment, from perspective of the fact that those areas are pretty, you know, surrounded on three sides, in Talish and on the Araxes, they are most exposed, right? So.
And also, it will take a while for any aid from Stepanakert or anywhere else.
So when
given the
when people
roads and
think about, you know, that this happened kind of haphazardly, I don't see that, because I see very clearly thinking behind.
Oh, the strategizing. Yes.
And also from the perspective of sort of trial run and see how Karabakh army reacts to fighting. It's also very important because those areas are far furthest away. That means it will take, you know, longer for the forces to deploy, and it gives you an opportunity to see how they deploy. So that's, you know, from that kind of perspective. But going back to the point of Talish, unfortunately, while this conflict persists, this area of say 5 to 10 kilometers from the line of contact is unsafe for normal life, and, you know, even more if you consider other artillery systems, air force, etc. But as far as even this low-key escalations, they create a huge problem. And of course on both sides, because there's actually a lot more Azerbaijani population that lives on the line of contact line. Yeah, but you know, it is up to the Azerbaijani government to decide on this one.
And one last question. You've represented Nagorno Karabakh in America.
Not personally, but I worked in the office of Nagorno Karabakh.
So what kind of work should be done in America or outside of Armenia, in the world, to represent Nagorno Karabakh better in a way? Or is there such a thing? There's an Armenian lobby, there's a Turkish, like Nagorno Karabakh lobby. Is there room for, you know, work to be done as far as informing other countries or populations?
Yeah, you know, my general sort of sense of what Karabakh is or should be is different from what Karabakh government says normally, and
what it is.
Armenian government says. I'll just talk about my personal perspective, is that, you know, we still have not corrected the mistakes we made at the end of the 80s, we as people, public society, when this movement was for unification of Karabakh and Armenia, and, you know, of course it faced resistance from the Soviet government, resistance from Azerbaijan. You know, it's understandable. You know, if, say, there was a hypothetical minority group in Armenia that tried to break away, there would probably be resistance from Armenia. So all that is understandable. However, I think the mistakes were made in the 1990-91 period when Armenia became an independent entity, as far as making it very clear what does Armenia want as far as Karabakh. Where, you know, that we want a new border with Azerbaijan that, you know, includes Karabakh inside Armenia. And that would make things a lot simpler. And we went this more convoluted route with the declaration of independence of Nagorno Karabakh and non-recognition by Armenia and the sort of limbo status that persists diplomatically to this day, while Karabakh, in effect, is part of Armenia today. So from the perspective of Karabakh diplomacy, I think Karabakh diplomacy should be primarily about Armenia, making sure that Armenia as quickly as possible recognizes Nagorno Karabakh as part of its territory, and goes through those steps that are required in between. That does not mean an end to the diplomatic process with Azerbaijan, by no means, because strategically, a strategic goal of Armenia should be peace with Azerbaijan, just like it is for Azerbaijan. Strategic goal should be peace with its neighbors. However, it's the terms of peace that are the most important, and I think at the minimum, the consensus understanding is that we want to make sure that those areas, mainland Armenian areas, are part of Armenia. So that's unfortunately not been articulated in a very clear and persistent way by Armenian diplomats, and of course the Karabakh diplomats as well, because they're caught in this weird situation where, on the one hand, they're representing a separate entity. On the other hand, that entity is not recognized. So the Karabakh official rhetoric about itself boils down to them to be represented as far as independent party to the negotiations, which from my perspective is not necessary, to be honest with you, to be perfectly honest. If Armenia represents them so effectively.
I think that's the key word.
So and of course, if, say, for example, Armenia did not represent them effectively, and they were a separate party to negotiations, that's not necessarily a good outcome for Karabakh, because Karabakh is not a recognized party as a country. So if you have a country that's better, has seats everywhere and seats at different tables, right? CSTO, I don't know, UN or something else, that may or may not be effective, whatever, but at least there is presence.
So we've basically created a confusion with where we're going with Nagorno Karabakh, and that is not reflecting positively in the image outside.
I think this confusion needs to be straightened. Yeah, because there is really not, and it fits into misunderstandings as far as Western or any other perception of this conflict, because from most people's perception is, well, if they're independent, maybe they want to have some kind of arrangement with Azerbaijan. And the reality is, in this region, we don't have successful models of, coexistence of that kind. And from the beginning, this was a very risky experiment when Nagorno Karabakh autonomy was established. But when it was established, at least you could say, well, it was within a larger entity. Well, there was a substantial Armenian population inside Azerbaijan, outside of Karabakh, a substantial Azerbaijani population in Armenia. So there was not, communists like to experiment, and this was one of those experiments. Now, these are three nation states in the South Caucasus, maybe more by the count, but...
so it's a failed experiment.
Yes, so there is not a solution that will be some kind of autonomous entity or whatever. It would always be a source of tension of where the border is without that clarity. So we need to strive for clarity. We need to strive for, of course there's always going to be some kind of conflicts, but we need to kind of resolve this, what at least is in our ability to resolve. As far as our rhetoric, as far as, so.
All right, thank you very much, and we'll be looking forward to speaking with you again once you're back from Nagorno Karabakh, hopefully with more information. And we thank the viewers for joining us as well.